If you play a lot of competitive games, you may have noticed over the years that the longer running games tend to introduce new rank tiers over time. For example, we just got champion rank in Overwatch, and other games like Valorant, League of Legends, and Apex have introduced new ranks in the past. So why is that? You might just think this is because the player bases of these games grew over time, and the increase in the player base created room for a new rank to fit in, which is part of it, but there's more to it than that, and it extends far past the realm of competitive video games. First off, let's take a look at the reasons each one of these games gave for introducing new ranks. The Overwatch director said it's because some divisions, like GM1, had players with too large of a skill range in them, so they introduced champion rank to better separate the upper portion of GM1 from the lower portion. The Valorant devs said they added Ascendant because the lower ranks had too many players in them, especially in Bronze and Silver. So essentially the opposite problem of Overwatch. In addition to this new rank in Valorant, they redistributed the MMR required to reach each rank so that the players at the bottom got a slight boost, and the new rank prevented overpopulating the top end. In February of 2020, the Apex devs added Master Rank to the game, saying that too many players were reaching the highest rank, Apex Predator, and it was becoming difficult to showcase the difference between two Predators, so they limited the Predator rank to only the top 500 players. League has changed their ranks so many times over the years that I'm only going to mention one instance. Let's focus on Season 9, where they introduced two new ranks, the Iron rank below Bronze, and the Grandmaster rank above Masters. In this season, one of the developers said that they needed these new ranks to level out the ranking system, because in ranks like Gold, it was very common to bounce back and forth between the higher end of Gold and the lower end of Gold, with just a few wins or losses. Meanwhile, at the bottom of Bronze, someone could improve a lot skill-wise, but still remain at the bottom, meaning there were too many players with varying skill levels, stuck at the very bottom, and not enough in the middle. Then, just like Overwatch and Apex, a new rank was needed at the top because of the large skill discrepancies between the players at the highest rank. We can start to see a pattern here. All of these developers say that the ranks didn't accurately represent a player's skill in some way or another, which made adding new ranks necessary to help level things out. If everything these developers said is true, then we might wonder why it would sometimes take several years to see these issues and finally update the game with new rank tiers. As I said at the start, we might conclude that this only became an issue that stemmed from player population growth skewing everyone's skill ratings. But in reality, the skill discrepancy that made these new ranks necessary would have existed regardless of if more players started playing these games or not, and I'll explain why. Assuming the population of these games didn't decay significantly, these new ranks would have still ended up being necessary, simply because the longer something that requires skill or knowledge exists, the better people will get at it over time. It sounds obvious when put that way, but the extent of how much better people get at these things is nearly impossible to imagine. Let's use speedrunning for an example that we can easily measure. Back in December of 2017, the game Getting Over It released, and became quite popular as both a speedrunning game and a game that creators would use for rage content. Within roughly the first month of that game's release, the top glitchless speedrun time was 1 minute and 56 seconds. I've never played the game before, but from the gameplay I've watched of it, that already sounds extremely impressive. Fast forward to the current top time, and it's now 59 seconds, and the old top time doesn't even break into the top 100 best times anymore. Now if we look at the span of time between these two runs, it's only been around 5 years, yet the current best time is around twice as fast as the previous best, and comparing the top 10 names from both of these time periods, we can see that none of the names in the top 10 from before are there now. From this example, we can see that even in a game that doesn't have a lot of players, and probably has only dropped in player count since its release, at the very top, players have still managed to get around twice as good as the former top players were in only 5 years. I'm sure when people saw a 1 minute and 56 second speedrun, it was hard for them to imagine just how much faster it could be done, and even now after watching the 59 second run, I can't imagine how it could get faster. But there may be someone in the future that finds a way, and this is just one of infinitely many examples. Getting Over It has unique physics and game mechanics, which made it harder to get used to at the start. Meanwhile, games like Overwatch, Valorant, and Apex are games that, although are very different from other FPS games in the genre, still have skills that could have been transferred over by anyone that has played another FPS game prior to playing any of these games. I'm talking about basic skills like movement or aim. Without knowing any of these games' unique movement or aim mechanics, you would still have a large advantage over someone that has never played an FPS game before, meaning the average skill of a player entering these games is already higher than it would be for a game with completely unique mechanics. Now imagine how rapidly the average skill of a player would change if the population was growing on top of the existing players naturally getting better over time. If it was as easily measurable as a speedrunning time, I can only imagine that players' skill levels would more than double over the course of 5 years at the top end. Within a few years, most of the top players at the start would be considered average, or maybe even below average by today's standards. Some would stick around at the top, but the majority will have dropped off, either from not playing enough to keep up, or quite literally having a skill issue. If you've ever seen someone make a post on social media saying they used to be a Masters player, but when they got back into the game, they're now stuck in gold, this can partly explain why. The other part being that they're probably also just a bit rusty. Both of these things together have led them to becoming a now average player. One advantage that people that are new to a game or other activity that requires skill have is being able to watch or learn from someone else that has already gone through the beginning steps, making them capable of reaching the highest level of skill faster than the initial group that had learned that skill because they now have someone to learn from. This is one of the factors that creates this rapid increase in skill, and within a decade, the most masterful people of today will be nothing compared to what the peak will be in 10 years. That's why a game like League, that has existed for over 10 years, has had to introduce new ranks and rework their ranking system so many times. The game has grown a lot, and players have over 10 years worth of knowledge to gain insight from. I don't keep track of it at all to know how much it's grown, but that growth, on top of players continuously playing since release, has created the need for continuous ranking changes. There is a disadvantage to this though. On one hand, it makes it easier for new players to learn and catch up if they have someone to learn from, but on the other hand, the initial learning curve might become too steep over time and make it too intimidating for a new person to want to get involved. This is where a development team might decide to sort of dumb down their game to make it easier for people to get interested in it again, which then of course upsets their more veteran players. The developers might even do something like adding a 2 to the end of the title to artificially make it look like a new game. To summarize why each one of the games I mentioned earlier might have added new ranks, League and Valorant most likely had a large increase in player count, causing the lower ranks to get overpopulated, and for the games that had the opposite problem, where there were too many players at the top ranks, this was because the best players got even better, but the ranking system wasn't set up to measure wide enough for their increased skill. Some of these players at the top might have started to feel like their rank was undeserved, while the people that continued to get better might have started feeling like their rank was meaningless because they were lumped in with players that weren't nearly as good. This is an interesting phenomenon that can be found in any form of skill or knowledge-based competition. I looked it up to try and find a name for this phenomenon, and it turns out it's called skill inflation. So if you're gold right now in Overwatch, congrats. 6 years ago, you probably would have been in Diamond or Masters prior to inflation. Make sure to tell your friends before they make fun of your rank again. There's no possible way that telling them this could backfire. Trust me. If you're still in the boat that can't imagine players getting even better than they currently are, try going back and watching a professional level game from a few years ago and compare it to a more recent one and see if there's a difference. It can be hard to see at a day-by-day level since it happens gradually, but once a few years pass, it becomes more apparent. I wanted to make this to showcase just how much more competitive everything gets over time, and maybe help people realize that even if a game isn't telling you that you've improved, maybe you are, but the game's ranking system might not be set up well enough to measure your increase. Thanks for watching.